Member for Kantora.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for giving me the floor. Honorable Speaker, I was following the debate keenly. Sometimes it appears to me that are we really on adjournment debate, or are we really discussing the state of public emergency and the regulation brought forward for us to peruse through, having in mind that the state of public emergency does not come from the thin air. Circumstances warrant it. Before going further, I think it's incumbent for us to understand some of the world statistics of this deadly COVID-19 virus. Currently, the US has recorded or confirmed 256,816, registered a death of 6,574. Spain, 117,000 plus, death of 10,000. This has really torn the entire dilemma in the world. In Italy, it has about 115,242, dead 13,945. Countries from the periphery nations, or the LDCs, less developing countries, begin to put up measures that when these giant countries, when these so-called developed countries or advanced world are registering the magnitude of this debt, haven't got in, the state-of-the-art equipment, testing laboratory machines, medical facilities, yet they are really struggling to contain this deadly disease. It is through daily updates our neighbors register 4 cases. Now it's now in hundreds. And as we speak now, the Gambia register a few cases. As the saying goes on, when Senegal coughs, Gambia catch the cold. That is why there's a need to have a state of public emergency. Before going to the intervention proper, I want to accept and recognize the robust intervention made by Senegal in putting in measures to curtail the spread of this deadly disease or virus. What is really incumbent upon us, now that we are in a situation which is very unusual, we found ourselves in an unusual circumstances that has dictated the states to proclaim a state of emergency. What's really important is to look at those regulations that's been accompanied by the motion to see, are those regulations actually tailored, or are those regulations actually geared towards curbing this menace? That could have been the bone of contention. What are some of the regulations? What is the disease prone to? What are the WHO guidelines? Social distancing. Why the need for us to close down, minimize the markets? Why is the need restrictions? Because disease does not really like crowd. And that justify the restrictions in these areas. When you come to also public places, gym areas, nightclubs and co., you would really agree that what the precautionary measures that WHO is giving is actually in line with the said regulation by the executives. This should be our responsibility to look at it, that are these regulations actually policies that are meant to curtail or control this virus? How effective are they? What is the policy input here? What was the policy meant to achieve? What is the rationale behind the policy here? Then you would know that this particular policy is actually working toward how do we safeguard our people? How do we protect? How do we curtail? How do you contain the spread? Are the regulations tailored in that manner? If you look at the statement by the minister in his motion, it thus went further that people do also take opportunities under these circumstances to compete in terms of political, social and economic interests, especially in such times of national and global crisis. There are people who also want to capitalize and reach themselves within this particular period. What is government doing to safeguard the vulnerable poor people in the country? Is coming up with such regulations whereby issue of extortion, issue of exploitation is discouraged. And that was why the issue of price ceilings come in play. I expect the debate to be more on regulations versus the emergency. Regulation versus the COVID-19. How is the regulation achieving the non-spread of COVID-19? How is the regulation also guiding and protecting the exploitation of our citizens? This should be the bone of contention. Of course, we agree that this COVID-19 has its social, political, economic impact already, be it tourism sector, be it revenue collection, even at the side of government, be it trade, business. Currently, the US has registered 6.6 million jobless. Of course, under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be the case. But because they found themselves under unusual circumstances, you can see the magnitude of job losses in their country. So what is really incumbent upon us is to task the executive to come with regulations that will discourage exploitation, that discourage the spread of COVID-19 and co. But if we are also looking at the policy impact, then it will be very difficult for us to make an informed decision. That of course, the policy, when we talk about restriction in public places, are people, where would they feed? Well, of course. What we can do here is to encourage government to come with some recommendations or some regulations in terms of subsidizing some essential materials, commodities in the market. We know that government cannot go around by giving everybody penny or money, but what they can do is to come in to subsidize. We are very approaching the Ramadan. What is the price of a bag of rice? How could government come in and subsidize? These are the measures. These are some recommendations we should be really dealing with, if you really care about this particular virus. Honorable Speaker, also I think COVID-19 is beyond individual. It's beyond individual intervention. It is beyond political line, and it's beyond the political blame game. It calls for a collective effort it is a national issue, not a political issue, then requires a national intervention. It requires the collective intervention. Enough for the blame game. What are the solutions that we can proffer? What are recommendations that can serve as policy or regulations that better the solution? Of course, so at times there are impacts felt. But how do we minimize the impact should be the bone of contention. And we also should not lose sight that this COVID-19 is highly contagious. I repeat, highly contagious. Last night I was watching the news. They said even through respiratory, breathing, you could contact this thing. If you are so close to a patient that is confirmed to have a COVID-19 virus, exchanging the breath, respirating very close to him, you could contact it. It now qualifies this as an airborne disease now. Therefore, there should be a rethink in the mindset on how to approach this thing now. I really appreciate, let me reference the member of Upper Salum, for asking the select committee or the standing committee what evidence or what yardsticks, what proofs do they have at hand to arrive at the 45 days. Knowing fully that this particular virus is highly contagious and we found ourselves in a very difficult situation, how does the political, that is the leadership, come in to curtail, protect the citizen from exploitation as well? Going through the restriction, I am really happy that the policies are really speaking with the matters at hand. The policies are really reflecting the real situation that we found ourselves in. And the only way to control this thing is through the social distancing. And that is really the guideline, that is really the idea of the policies. These over 500 million grants can come out even on adjournment debate. However, it's our opinion, but I would have loved that more of intervention to be done on the document at hand based on regulations versus the motion. However, with those few remarks, I want to thank everybody for indulgence, but I also want to reiterate that it's more of how do we shape these policies that will fit the current realities on ground? How does these regulations actually address the current situation? So therefore, I also challenge the mover that why does he think that 90 days is not visible, 45 days is visible? If he's been able to convince us beyond reasonable doubt, knowing what is really at hand, of course, we'll give a blessing and support to the 45 days.